1 Samuel 17. As soon as the Israelite army saw him, they began to run away in fright. The part of verse 25 I want to read is, have you seen the giant? What I'm going to talk about a little bit today is, have you seen my giant? If you'll preach with me, if you put your Bibles down and pray, let's go before the Lord. God, we thank you for everything that you're already going to do in this place. Lord, thank you, God. If you'll preach with me, you may be seated. As I said when I was talking about this at the beginning, the story of David is a Sunday school favorite. All of us have heard the story, and we probably honestly have it memorized. And as you look through this story, you can really apply the aspects of David and Goliath to your everyday life. Everybody, even in your career path, people use the story of David and Goliath. But there's part of the story that I really want to focus on today that's usually forgotten, that is usually kind of stepped over. First, David is the youngest of 8 boys. Growing up in a household, people want you to look at David as, well, he was the youngest. He was the baby. He was the run of the family. I can tell you I grew up with 3 older sisters, and we fought like cats and dogs. I couldn't imagine what it would be like with 7 older brothers. I'm going to go ahead and tell you, David probably wasn't a weakling and as small as everybody thought he was, but still he was the youngest of 7 boys. When the prophet Samuel came to Jesse's house to anoint the next king of Israel, Jesse got all of his sons but David. He left the runt out. All the sons that were of fighting age. In 1 Samuel chapter 16, it says, Jesse brought his 3 eldest sons first. The 3 that in his mind would make the best king over Israel. And individually, the first 3 sons went before the prophet. Because this is what Jesse thought the next king of Israel would look like. When Samuel looked over the first 3 sons, he went before the Lord without even viewing the other 4. He said, Lord, which one of these is going to be the king over Israel? Lord spoke to his prophet, telling him, ignore the outward appearance and look into their hearts. Then Samuel went back to Jesse and said, is this all you have? And he said, hang on, I have 7. So he went and got the 3 eldest sons again. And then the 4 after that. So the 3 oldest boys got 2 looks at from the prophet. And then the other 4 came. Then Samuel asked the question, is this all you have? And he said, well, I do have one more. After each of them were rejected to be the next king by Samuel, he asked, is there any more? And Jesse said, I have the run of the group. The youngest is tending the sheep. You see, David wasn't the strongest of all of his brothers. He was, in all reality, the smallest of them all. He wasn't the best singer. He wasn't the best speaker. When his father got word that one of his sons would be the next king over Israel, David didn't even come to his father's mind. David, in all reality, was an afterthought. As we all know, Samuel anointed David to be the next king. As the book of Samuel continues, we learn that the Philistines were gathering. After David had been anointed the next king, Saul brought him up to the palace and saw this. But then the Philistines came, and Saul didn't have time for the runt of the group. So he said, hey, you've got to go home. You can't fight in battle. You're not ready to fight. You're too small. You're too young. You've got to go back. And David returned home. The future king went home to work in the fields. So Saul called up the army of Israel and set camp on one mountain. The Philistines, seeing this, set camp on the other side of the mountain. In between the 2 mountains, there was a great valley. If anybody in here is a tactician or enjoys reading war stories or seeing history, the worst part to be at, or the worst advantage you can give your enemy, is giving them the high ground. There's a famous movie of Star Wars fans. Obi-Wan stands and says, give up, Anakin. I have the high ground. Both the Philistines and Israel stood on the high ground, waiting for one of the armies to fall into the valley. After days and months, finally, like I said, I got a story, but you got to stick with me. I promise I'm going to preach to you. after days and weeks, finally, out comes Goliath. 1 Samuel chapter 17 says, he presented a challenge to the Israel camp. Instead of answering the challenge, it says the whole camp was afraid. It didn't say Saul was afraid and the mightiest warriors in Saul's camp. It said the whole camp was afraid of the giant. You see, the camp saw something very simple in their way. They didn't see the Philistine army behind Goliath. They saw a single obstacle in the way, and they instantly believed it was unbeatable. They made the same mistake the prophet did, looking at the Goliath. They saw the man and never looked into the man's heart to see what was actually inside. They saw the height, the weapon, the armor that he had, but never took time to look inside the heart and the beliefs and really pay attention to what Goliath was saying and challenging God's chosen people. They decided immediately, without a second thought, that it was a man that was unbeatable. No man could beat him. They didn't even think to go before God, the God that delivered them from the Egyptians, the most powerful army of that time. They didn't think to go before the God that split the Red Seas. They didn't think to go before the God that took down the walls of Jericho with them screaming. They immediately said, this man is unbeatable. Around 40 days has passed now, and every single day, this giant, this behemoth of a man, walks out and challenges God's chosen people, cursing their God, cursing their nation, and he challenges them daily. Around 40 days had passed, and Jesse sent David with food to his 3 oldest brothers. When David arrived, he saw the men in formation, standing tall, and then he saw Goliath, and out walked this giant man. And more importantly, he heard the challenge. But the biggest thing David saw, it took an entire 3 scriptures in 1 Samuel to talk about the fear that David saw, not in the eyes of his brother, not in the eyes of Saul, in the eyes of the entire Israelite army. And immediately when he asked this, and he starts talking to the camp and saying, why is he doing this? The camp says, shut up, boy. Do you see the giant? The fighting men only saw Goliath. The devil only wants you to see the fight that's going to be in front of you. He doesn't want to see the blessing on the other side of the valley. He's worried that if he puts a giant obstacle in your way, you're going to forget about the blessing that can be possible on the other side of the valley. The blessing that's possible on the other side of the mountain. When we walk our path with God and continue the path, there's going to be giants put in our way simply to stop you from receiving the blessing on the other side of the valley. You're called to be a disciple. You're called to be a soul winner. You're called to be a fisherman. But first, we have to face our giant. But David didn't all do this alone. Our story continues. David was questioning. Nobody went after this giant. Nobody went even to try to fight this giant. They were all scared of him. Eventually, word got to Saul. And here comes the virtual learning. Where's Big Josh and Little Josh? I'm going to need both of you real quick. This is a virtual part. I'm a virtual learner, so we're going to learn virtually together. Little Joshua, I promise you're going to like this. This is going to be cool, I promise. Fair Yeah. Yeah, David, now you're ready to go. And David looked at him and so I can't even move. I'm putting the microphone down. There you go. Microphone down. He said, I can't even move. How am I supposed to fight like this? The matchup looked better before. So David said, no, I can't do this, Lord. So David took off the armor, the thing that was supposed to protect him. The thing that went before war before. He said, look at the matchup. He said, God, I can't go like this, Saul. What the world told David that was going to protect him against the giant. What the world said, no, you need your armor. You got to have your armor. Sometimes the world's going to tell us, no, can't nothing save you from what you're going through. You're going to need this. You're going to need this. Sometimes you're going to need a weapon on you because God can't protect you from this. I'm here to tell you that you don't need to worry about what the world tells you need in life. Doctors are going to tell you there's no hope and you're going to need this medicine. Bankers are going to tell you there's no hope for your finances. You're going to need this program. I'm here to tell you that David went before Goliath with a sling and some stones. There's no need for us to have to go before this world and everything that it gives us. David saw the weapons. You're good, man. Thank you. David saw the armor, saw the preparation that the world gave him, and said, I got a better chance on my own. So Saul put this armor on him. The story of how he killed the bear and the lion as he's telling Saul after he'd taken off this armor. Saul heard this and said, go, the Lord will be with you. But before he sent him, he put on all of his personal armor. It wasn't just a typical Israelite armor. It wasn't the stuff I had. No. It was the best of the best. Only fit for a king. He gave David the best he had to protect him. David couldn't even move, just like little Joshua couldn't even move in that armor. That armor is meant for people smaller than what I am now, even though it was mine. David couldn't even move in the armor, it says. It was too big. 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 38 and 40, then Saul gave David his armor. David put it on and strapped the sword over it and took a step or two to see what it was like. For he had never worn such things before. Even though David had killed a bear, even though he killed a lion, he'd never worn such fine armor like this before. So even though you've gone through some things in your life, even though you've conquered some giants in your life, you can tell the world, I've already done this without it. The world's going to say, you still need this in your life. Just because you've gotten out of alcohol once, the world's going to say, no, you're going through something. You're going to need a little bit today just to get through today. Just because you've been delivered from an addiction, the world's going to say, no, you've had a tough day. You're going to need this to get through today. I'm telling you, David killed a bear and a lion with his bare hands. And the world said, you're going to need this to take down this giant. I can't go in these, he persisted to Saul. I'm not used to them. So David took them off again. Just like Saul had this world come out and say, it has all the answers to every single one of your problems. Every single one of your problems. It can fix the issues. They want to give you these versions of a fix, a way to mask the issues that the devil's going to present in your life. He wants us to go back to the old ways that we fixed our problems. He's comfortable with you coming to church as long as you go back to the old ways of fixing your problems and dealing with the trouble. You see, but the issue is once you come to church, something magical happens when you step inside water. What David did was he took off the problems that the world gave him, the fixes that the world gave him, and he stepped into some water and picked up 5 stones. Sometimes when you get down in that water, what happens is the world's fixes don't even need to happen anymore. The things the world tell you that you need, you get to ignore because you've been down in the water and been washed free. Amen? 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 45, then David said to the Philistine, as he's calling out this Philistine. The Philistine laughs at him and says, boy, please, go give me a man. You ain't even worth my time. And he cursed the camp of Israel, and he cursed God again. David said unto the Philistine, thou comest to me with a sword, and with a spear, and with a shield. It's important to note that Goliath came with 2 weapons and 1 way of protection. 2 weapons and 1 way of protection. The devil's not going to attack you with 1 single attack. If you remember, David didn't fight Goliath on the mountain. David had to step into the valley where the Goliath was. He stepped down into the bad part of where nobody ever wanted to be. He stepped down into that to fight Goliath. And then Goliath came after him with 2 weapons. The devil's not going to just give you 1 battle to fight at a time. He's going to wait till something catastrophic hits your life. Something when it's getting bad and you don't see a way out. And then he's going to say, hey, guess what? I got an easy way for all this to go away. That addiction that you let go, that problem that you had in your life, guess what? If you just take this just 1 time, I can help your issues 1 time. And then Goliath had a shield because the devil expects you to say, no, I beat that once. And that's your 1 little quick attack that Goliath is prepared for with that shield. That shield is meant for that 1 little, no, I got through once with God. The devil's going to come back with that 2nd attack. You're right, but now you're in the valley, boy. God ain't coming for you when you're in the valley with me. When the Goliath gets in the way of you receiving a blessing, that's when you remember what God has already brought you through. It's important not to forget the past, not because the negatives, but because when you get to look back at what my God has done for me, what he's already done. If the children of Israel would have looked back, he's already delivered me from the Egyptians. He's already split the waters for me. He already took down Jericho for me. He gave me a king to protect me. When you look back at what your God has done for you in your life, no giant is going to be able to stay in your path. No valley that you're going to walk through, you're walking through alone. When you look back at your past and say, God's brought me through this already, devil. He can cure diseases. He can fix relationships. He can fix finances. But before any of that happened, David went down to the water. This is going to be the 5 minutes I'm going to preach to you for a little bit. The first 10 were just a story. 1 Corinthians chapter 13, 11. Those of you that don't know, I was a Bible quizzer for years. It's easier just to say years. And I coached for years. 1 Corinthians chapter 13, 11 is probably the verse that sticks with me throughout my entire Bible quizzing career. It states, when I was a child, I spake as a child. I understood as a child. I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. Growing up, I took this as a very straight to the point of a maturity issue. That when I'm a child, I'm going to think and I'm going to act like this. Let me go ahead and break it down to what God really was saying in all this for you, just in case somebody doesn't understand. When I was in this world, I acted like the world. I thought like the world. I reasoned like the world. But like David, when I went down to the water, when I decided to start living for God, when I became a child of God, I stopped acting like the world. I stopped thinking like the world. I stopped reasoning like the world. When you decide that you're going to be a child of God, it's not about just stepping down and saying, who is this giant? It's when you decide personally when you're going to live as God, live for God, is when you decide to put away the things of this world. The giant steps into your path to stop you from pushing forward. The giant was never really there to kill your entire walk with God. He's there to stop you from pushing forward in your walk with God. I can't state it enough, and I say it probably every time I preach. He doesn't mind you coming to church on Sundays and Thursdays, as long as you just come to church. He stops you in your tracks. The giant is meant to detour you, because the devil knows what happens if you decide to grab a hold of your calling. He knows what happens when you decide to grab a hold of the blessing that God's put in your life. I'm I'm a firm believer that nobody's meant to just warm a pew chair in any kind of Pentecostal or apostolic church. That's not what the purpose of anything was. That giant that's in your path is the giant that's in your path to stop you from, because the devil knows good and well, if they get a hold of their calling, I'm in trouble. If they get a hold of that blessing that God has behind this giant, I'm in trouble. And the reason he puts a giant in your path, and more importantly, a giant that you've probably already seen, is because even if you're able just to peek around the giant and see the blessing, you're able to push through it. No. He wants something in your way as an obstacle that you can't see behind, that everybody around you says is unbeatable, that this is a death mission, that there's no reason for you to try to do this on your own, that you need to go into the world and you need to find some kind of armor that the world has to issue you, and maybe that can protect you from this. The key word is the world's going to give you stuff to protect you from the giant. Never overthrow. Protect you from the giant. 2 Samuel chapter 2, verse 21. We all know the story of David. This is where it goes back to your past. We all know the story of David and Goliath. We all know the story that happened because David killed Goliath. But nobody really pushes in to 2 Samuel chapter 21 and see what else happened because David killed Goliath. See, Goliath was a family member of Rapha, was a descendant of Rapha. Rapha was the family of giants of the Philistines. 2 Samuel chapter 21, verse 18 to 22. 18. In the course of time, there was another battle of Philistines of Gob. At the time, Sebekah and Hashatah killed Sapha, one of the descendants of Rapha. Another giant came before Israel. Verse 19, in another battle, the Philistines of Gob, Alhana, son of Jar, killed the brother of Goliath in Gittel, who had a spear with a shaft like a weave's mid. Verse 20, and still in another battle, we took place at Gath. There was a huge man with 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes. And chapter 22, these were 4 descendants of Rapha and Gath, and they fell at the hands of David and his men. What happens is the devil knows good and well, if you're able to get past your giant, not just protect yourself, but if you're able to get past your giant, the reason you're not supposed to forget what God has brought you through is so you can be a disciple and tell people, God brought me through this, so that when somebody else sees a giant in their life, when Goliath or his ugly brothers want to stick their head out, you can say, oh no, I've gone through this before. This is what happens when you go this way. Then more giants get knocked down. And now the devil has a problem because not just you have received your calling and your blessing, but the person next to you, the cashier at Kroger's, the guy that pumps your gas down at Speedway, the guy that fixes your car. Now they've received a calling and a blessing on their life. And now they're going to go and tell somebody, hey, this is what God can do for you because he did it for me. And more Goliaths and more giants get taken down. It happens when we become fisher of men and share our testimony. Too many times people are worried about telling what's happened to you in your past, telling you what God's brought you through. When you're a fisher of men, you have no problem telling your story of what happened, the story of the giants you killed. We're able to help others meet their giants. I have no problem telling you I was 19 years old. I was going to college and I was coming to church and I was all good and well. I decided I wanted to be all I could be. I wanted to be the baddest dude on the block and wasn't nobody going to be able to touch me. I decided to join the one thing that I thought ain't nobody going to be able to take me if I do this. And I joined the Marine Corps. While I was in the Marine Corps, I got addicted to all kinds of things. At the age of 19, I went through 2 cans of dip a day. I can't tell you what my Saturday nights looked like when I was in the Marine Corps because I don't remember them. It had nothing to do with anything else. Because I couldn't remember them. I still can't. I have no problem telling you that as a 19-year-old, I went through all that. I cussed worse than any sailor you've ever heard, I promise. And I had no problem telling you that because now I can look back and I can tell you what happened was a man of God in North Carolina that now I call one of my pastors stepped up to me and he told me what he went through. And then he told me, you had a week, son. You had a week to get it all out. And I looked at him and I said, please, this boy's in the Navy. He don't want none. And he sat there and he told me all this. And he said, you got a week to get it out of your system. He said, so enjoy this week. Because Sunday I will be at your barracks, and I will be picking you up for church. I tell you all that to tell you because of a man stepped into my life and told me, hey, I've done all this. It feels good. It's a great feeling in your life. However, I've killed my giant. And instead of letting you go into a valley alone, when we're disciples and we're fisher of men, we don't let somebody go into a valley alone. Because now, instead of just one David, there's two Davids facing one giant. And then those two people reach two more. Now there's four people facing one giant. When we decide to be disciples and fishers of men, you don't face your giants anymore. That's the difference of coming to church and being in church. Don't forget what God has brought you through. Your past is your testimony. And your testimony is the most dangerous weapon you have to take into battle with you. Don't forget the addictions. Don't forget the attachments. Don't forget the debt. Instead, use these conquered giants as a form of your attack. I told you I won't be long if the music could come. It's crazy. I'm pretty sure the last time I preached it wasn't this hot in here. I don't know if it's because I have extra insulation or if Pastor Long's just turning up the heat and trying to get me to lose some extra insulation. Some of us here may be at the point of David in our life. You may very well be at the point where you walk into a camp and you're going straight into a battle. David was not sent to the Israelite camp to fight. He was sent there to deliver food. Maybe you woke up this morning just planning to come to church. And maybe tomorrow morning you're going to wake up just planning to go to work. You're not prepared for a battle. You're not prepared for a Goliath in your path. We may hear the giant just walk out of nowhere and begin shouting at us, telling us, I know what you're coming from. There ain't no way you can beat me. We may have the giants letting us know that this is where we will be defeated. This is where the giant's going to tell you, this is where your walk with God ends. You're stopping right here. This is all God ever had for you, was just to show up on Sunday, get your little Sunday school lesson with your pastor, and have some 26-year-old brown nose tell you everything you need to know. This may be it. But I'm here to tell you, maybe it's time we prepare ourselves for that battle. As the music's playing, I'm going to open up the altar. Maybe you're at that point where you're already in the battle. And Goliath's already showed his, everybody can stand with me. Maybe you're at the point where Goliath has already showed his ugly face. And maybe you're going through the fight now. And they've already decided that your walk with God is done here. The altar is the stream where we were able to go and find those 5 smooth stones. The place to find the answers and the weapons to take to our giants. Maybe you've tried everything that the world has to offer you. You've put on the armor of Saul. You've listened to people. You listen to doctors. You listen to people that have gone to college for years and years tell you this is the way out of your current circumstance. Maybe it's time to go before the altar. As I'm opening up the altar, maybe it's time you step out of your pew, because the giant's not going to move. He's never going to move. He's never going to get out of your way so you can just continue to walk on your place with God. The giant may direct you in a different path. And you may think this path is going to bring you to blessings and bring you to callings. But how much more would that blessing be? How much more would that calling have on your life if you went through that giant? We have everything that's needed. As they sing, and we find a place, we find our weapons, you find your answer. If you haven't been baptized, I'm telling you, we have water here. If you haven't received the Holy Ghost, I'm telling you, we have people here that can get you there. Only God can help us permanently defeat our giants.
my